Okay, so we are now live on YouTube. For those of you joining us on YouTube, welcome. You missed the intro because I didn't hit the go live button. So I'm going to run through the intro one more time here. We have with me here is PlusEVanalytics. One second here. PlusEVanalytics. He is a actuary by trade. Tonight we're going to be calling him Matt. That may or may not be his real name. Matt, welcome to the broadcast.
Great to be here, Jack. Thanks a lot for having me.
And then my other person here on the panel is Andrew Mack. He is a former electrician. He is a lawyer. He is a data science degree in progress student. And he's an excellent sports bettor at that. He's written 2 books. These are the Statistical Sports Models in Excel, Volume 1 and Volume 2. If you have not read these, they are excellent reads for anyone who's kind of learning to get an edge at sports. Andrew Mack, welcome as well.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, Jack, and nice to see you, Matt.
Okay, so gentlemen, thank you for hanging in there through our little snafu to get started. So we're going to be taking questions both in the Zoom room, and those of you who are in Zoom, you already know this because you heard that entire spiel a couple minutes ago. But those of you who are joining on YouTube, your broadcast just started. And if you would like to ask any questions or have any comments, there's a chat window there on YouTube. I'll be monitoring it and throwing in some questions from there as they come up. So feel free to make use of that if you're watching on the live stream on YouTube. So to get things kicked off here, I'm going to ask a question of my 2 panelists who I've asked this question of everyone who's been on the previous happy hours, and that's only been 4 people. So, but my question is, if you could have dinner with someone from the industry in general, whether they be living or dead, present or past, who would you choose to have dinner with? Andrew, I'm going to send it down to you first.
You know, off the top of my head, I think I would pick William Benter. Just because, obviously, famous in the horse racing circles, and the papers that I've read from him are, quite ingenious. Although I don't do anything with horse racing per se, but I was just very impressed with the material from him that I've seen, and I think that you could learn more than a thing or two from talking to him over an evening. In terms of any historical context, I don't know, maybe Pierre Simon Laplace.
Oh, there we go. That's a reference.
Those would be my picks.
We're getting the party started tonight. Nicely done, Andrew.
So yeah, Bill Benter is an excellent choice. Very nice man. I've had the pleasure of actually meeting him. He is a really meek and mild type of guy. You'd never guess that he made so much money like he made from betting on horses over there in Hong Kong when he was doing that. And his models were just incredible. And in fact, Andrew, you had a chapter in your book called the Benter Boost, I believe, in the first book,
That's right.
where, was kind of something that you had gleaned from his work. And that was very, very cool. When I saw your list of chapters before your book was published and saw one was called the Benter Boost, I DM'd you on Twitter. I was like, Benter as in Bill Benter? And you were like, yeah. I'm like, all right, I'm buying this book. This is good. He knows what he's doing. Matt, over to you. Who would you have dinner with from the industry, past or present?
So it's a little bit of a stretch in that he's not really in the industry per se, but I'd go with Nassim Taleb. People who follow me on Twitter know that I'm a huge fan, even though he did block me on Twitter. I don't hold a grudge for that. But I owe so much of the way I think about probability, the way I think about information to his writings. I strongly recommend all of his books to anyone who wants to just broaden the way they think about risk or probability.
Okay. Very interesting. So, Matt, you are an actuary by trade. And how has that affected the way you go about sports betting in general?
Well, it's given me a lot of tools, a lot of things that are covered in sort of the actuarial education curriculum, where if you have kind of a gambler's mindset, you read these things and you say, hey, these things can be applied broader than just insurance pricing. These things can be applied to the analysis of sports betting data or odds or any of these things. So I think from that point of view, people always ask me, does being an actuary make you a better sports bettor? And the answer is obviously yes, for those reasons. I think the more interesting point is that being a sports bettor has made me a better actuary, because I get to interact with this thing called risk on a daily basis in a much deeper way than most actuaries would get from just studying in a textbook. And I have experience, having my own skin in the game, where I can make an assumption, I can build a model, but if that assumption turns out to be wrong, then I suffer financially. And I think that's just a position that most people who are sort of just working for a living doing this kind of thing don't get to experience. And I think it's really broadened the way I look at analytics, the way I look at risk. And so I think that my my hobby and my career have really helped each other. I'm lucky that way.
Very interesting. That's fascinating, because I wouldn't think that sports betting would further an actuary. I would think an actuary career would further a sports bettor, but that's kind of fascinating. Andrew, you have had a long path to get to here, and not that you're up in years or anything, but you originally started out as a electrician, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And then you moved on to getting your law degree, and now you told me yesterday you're getting your data science degree on the side as well.
That's right. Yeah, I was finishing it concurrently, and I should be done probably next January. So
how do all of these? How does this all come together in a pathway? Like, how does this fit together?
Maybe it doesn't. On the surface, I certainly would accept that. For me, I was an electrician for a long time. Electrical as a trade is very it's hard on the body. I think I mentioned that in previous podcasts, and that's one of the major reasons why I decided to maybe look at something else. But it's it's quite math heavy, applied math, of course, mostly trigonometry, interestingly enough, in terms of three-phase electricity and sine waves, stuff like that. But there was it's very logical, and I think that if you can do well with applied, like trade school math and electrical, I think that you can do very well with coding and also with statistics, because they're similarly logical and sequential. And but for me, it was really just that as an electrician, I was betting on the NHL and not doing very well, and put it together eventually that this is a math challenge, and that you're going to have to use math to beat math. And that sort of started the long journey of being less wrong.
Just hearing the word trigonometry gave me chills, just some bad flashbacks to high school. It was not my favorite branch of mathematics, and it was always like, what is the point of this? And I guess Andrew has now explained what the point of that is, so thank you.
Yeah, that's also true of Pythagorean theorem as well. That you see internet memes all the time where it's like, I'm so glad I learned Pythagorean theorem. I'm 38 and I still haven't used it yet. In electrical, you can actually use Pythagorean theorem in the field on an almost daily basis. The main use of it is actually to calculate the length of a rolling offset, which is a piece of conduit that electrical wires are carried through. And if you're trying to roll an offset, so say, for example, to offset it 4 inches on an x-axis and 6 inches on a y-axis, the length of the hypotenuse is the actual size of the offset. And so you can use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out how long it actually has to be. So there actually is real world use for it, contrary to popular belief.
So if you came here tonight looking for sports betting advice, I'm sorry. The electrical engineering tonight.
Tomorrow.
That's right. You are all now first-year electrical apprentices.
Welcome to the sine wave with Jack, Andrew, and Matt.
Yeah, the pay is much better once we get into the unions. So, okay. So I got another question for you guys, and that is, we're coming up now. Tomorrow the NBA starts. 2 days later the NHL starts. 2 days from now the NHL starts. Major sports jam-packed in the entire month. What are you looking forward to? Matt, I'll start with you.
I'm looking forward to just having something to watch in the evenings after a long, it's been what, 4.5 months now of the world kind of being on pause. So just being able to get back into sports, even just on a fan level, is something I'm really looking forward to. From a betting and analytics perspective, I think what we're looking at is a whole bunch of unknowns, a whole bunch of differences in the way the games are happening versus the way they used to happen. So the most obvious example is no fans. And you know, what does home field advantage look like in a world with no fans? I think there have been a couple of soccer examples from years past where they played games with no fans, but really nothing in terms of mainstream North American sports. I think it was a game in Baltimore or Washington a couple of years ago where there was no fans, but you know, that's 1 or 2 games. You can't really do much with that. So I think everyone will be trying to reevaluate what home field advantage is worth, if anything. It'll give us a chance to test all these hypotheses people have had about what the source is of home field advantage. Is there some kind of ref bias because of the sound of the crowd? Does it have more to do with the home team being comfortable in their own dressing room, sleeping in their own beds? Is it something else? So I think we'll have a lot to learn from that. And also from the betting perspective, just short season in baseball. I wrote an article last week on how to price some baseball season props when books are having to convert these things from 162 games to a 60-game season. And I found what I hoped were some plus EV plays there that all look like they're going to get voided because at least a couple of teams are not going to play out the full season. But just any time where things happen that are abnormal or unusual, that gives the bookmakers a chance to make a mistake because they're going by history. And the less history you have, the more you have to sort of make it up as you go along. And the more they do that, the more opportunities there are for someone like me to sort of build a model and see if I can find some holes. So that's what I look forward to.
Yeah, and I'll say that blog that you wrote last week, that was pretty special. There's not often that somebody gives you picks and gives you the process and gives you the detail as to how they came about the process. Really, somebody could read that blog entry and probably use just that, 500,000 words or whatever you wrote there to become a better sports bettor long term. It reminded me there was in Stanford Wong's book Sharp Sports Betting that he wrote back in 2000 or so. He had a chapter called Poison Props, and it was about using the Poisson distribution to handle props. And you guys are both nodding your heads because this is second nature to you guys. But that was kind of revolutionary to me, and I started using that like nonstop I still use it in some cases. But basically, I got to be a much better sports bettor just reading this one chapter of one book, and that's what that article felt like, Matt, with your props. And I think you were spot on with your analysis. This is a season where we're going to have more variance than usual, and there's going to be a lot more outliers. It is unfortunate that the Marlins have screwed it all up for us. I mean, I don't know. I felt some of the places that I found those might still honor the props because they're about how much will the league leader have, in this. And if the majority of teams can still play 60 games, except for the Marlins, and the Marlins opponents is going to be the other thing, then I think some books will still honor it. Because I think in some of those cases, it's going to go over easily, even if there's 57 games played.
I'm still holding out hope they're going to jam the last week of the season full of Marlins doubleheaders every day and somehow get to that 60 games. I think it's probably false hope at this point.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Andrew, over to you. Same question. What are you looking forward to most in August?
Well, I think that Matt hit a few of the really important points on the head, which is just that and you as well, that there's going to be a lot more variance in a short season. And we can take advantage of that as sports bettors that are trying to use math to get ourselves an edge. I think that, for example, with the NBA, you're going to see lineups are going to be absolutely crucial, above and beyond the change in the home court advantage, right? What is the new home court advantage without fans? Obviously, that's going to be a major factor. But the other thing is going to be lineups, because some of these guys are getting coronavirus, right? Like that's, or are going to be questionable, or are going to sneak out for a pizza or something and get quarantined for 14 days. So it's likely that you're going to see more lineup variance than you've seen normally, even in the playoffs or in the closing of the regular season. And people that can better account for that and are less likely to both under and, more importantly, I think, overreact are going to be well positioned to take advantage of it. So for the NBA, that's definitely what I'm sort of looking forward to. I'm also looking forward to the NHL getting fired up again, because I think that there are a couple of matchups that are not being totally effectively priced at the moment, and I think that there's going to be really nice opportunities for value in the NHL.
Okay, interesting. And we'll leave that as sort of a cliffhanger there. I know you don't want to give too much away because not all the lines are up everywhere, so it could be something you're saving for yourself later. That's perfectly fine.
Just back to
for
Andrew's
myself,
point about lineups. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Just Andrew's point about lineups is spot on, and that's why I was so shocked to see at the beginning of the baseball season there were some books that were doing away with listed pitchers. And you can debate whether or not that's a good thing to do, but this would be the absolute worst time to do it, because the short-sighted perspective is, well, I don't want to have to give out refunds, so I won't have listed pitchers. But now, if there's late-breaking news, whether it's coronavirus or otherwise, these books are going to have to be on top of everything to the second, or they're just going to get front run like crazy.
Yeah, definitely. And that whole listed pitchers, no more listed pitchers thing, that benefited sharp bettors tremendously. It doesn't really benefit the average recreational bettor, because a lot of recreational bettors would lay the chalk. They see, oh, that's Kershaw going, I'll lay, 3-1 on a Kershaw game. Well, it's not the same Kershaw that it used to be. And sure enough, he had a back injury that, supposedly sprung up hours before the game. I think it was known before that. But anyway, the point being is, yeah, it's an information game right now. The sports books are going to need to stay on top of it. And now they're going to have 3 different concurrent major sports running at the same time. And they're going to have to keep up with the information of all of that. I would not want to be a bookie this time of year with this scenario. It's just going to be really hard for them. And it's going to be not so hard for guys like us that can stay on top of this and, have our different feeds and sources. So
they might have to lose sight of Hungarian table tennis now. They might have to let that one go and, put it on the shelf till wave 2.
I saw that Don Best said, we're not going to show you odds for table tennis anymore. Like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's the thing I'm looking forward to the most, is that this August is just going to be so jam-packed that I think a lot of sports books aren't going to see it coming, and they're going to, it might be easy pickings there for a lot of the month. So just a reminder, if you're watching on Zoom, you can enter a question into the Q&A. There's a Q&A button there for you. The other thing you can do is you can raise your hand. If you go into, there's a button there that says raise hand, and I can enable your audio, and you can ask us a question just like this with Sports Talk Radio. Just a lot more intelligent than the average sports talk radio. So if you would like to do that, you can go ahead and click the raise hand button. I can enable your audio and we can have a little chat. If you're watching on YouTube, there is the chat window there. There are some people in there having a little bit of discussion. Check 99 is online from Portugal. That guy is in just about every one of my live streams, even though there's a 5 or 6 hour time difference there to Portugal. Check 99, thanks for Thanks for joining in there from Portugal again. So we do have a question that has popped up on Zoom, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it here. Mookie, I'm not sure if that's Mookie Wilson or Mookie Blaylock, but Mookie asks, regarding future/prop bets that should be voided if all MLB teams don't play 60 games, some offshore books, i.e. 5 dimes, seem to be free rolling on their customers. Is this common with most offshore books or just 5 dimes? Well, we haven't really seen that all MLB teams won't play 60. We assume that the Marlins will not play 60. They're going to have like more than a week's worth of games to make up with less than a week's worth of off days in the schedule. So right now we're just assuming that there's not going to be a full 60 played by every team. So you can't really fault the sportsbook for not canceling the bet yet. They don't really have a reason to. And the worst thing that could happen is they cancel the bet and then the bet wins and the teams play 60 games and then you're upset at that too. So we can't really be too upset about books not deciding on MLB season-long bets just yet. I know there's been some cases of people that have been upset about how different sports books have handled NBA bets, season win bets that haven't fully been decided. They're waiting for the final 8 games to be played of the regular season, even though the bet would have won without those 8 games being played. So there's been some different complaints. I hear a lot of them. But now I'll ask Andrew and Matt. Go to Andrew first because he seems to be finishing off that first beer. What's your kind of experience in dealing with some of these offshore books? How has that gone? Has it been an overall plus experience, or you're in Canada, so it's a kind of different game up there. You have to use a lot of offshores if you're going to play. So how's it been going?
You sure do. If you're not using offshore, you're pretty much cooked up here. I would say that our major saving grace is that Pinnacle is available to us. That is certainly, the shining light in terms of betting in the Great White North. I've had a pretty good experience with Pinnacle. With a few others, Bookmaker has been pretty good too. Generally not too much of a hard time in terms of getting paid and transferring funds and that sort of thing. And really, I think Poker Joe talks about it in his book, but I mean, the number one factor for any book is the probability that you will ever see your money again and or get paid if you win, number one. And then number two, where can I find the best price? And yes, of course, price is important. It's very important, but it doesn't mean anything if you're never going to get paid. So, with respect to those two things, I've had a pretty good experience, and yeah.
Okay, good. Matt, how's your experience been?
Well, first of all, I hate to be the bearer of bad news to you, Jack, but you're old. Mookie Wilson is probably 80s. Mookie Blaylock 90s. I think Mookie Betts is probably what he's going for in this case. But it's got me worried about free rolling their customers. I didn't even think that was a possibility. But you never know with some of these offshore books. I don't have experience or much experience with 5 dimes specifically, which is where I place these bets. I have not been in a position with that book where there would ever be the kind of ambiguity that would arise here. So I'm sure there are other people in the community who would be able to answer that a lot better than me. I would hope that that wouldn't happen, and I would hope that the sort of gambling Twitter community would band together like they have in some cases of perceived unfair treatment, because I think that this community does have a lot of influence, and if they start boycotting some of these books for some of these practices, then I think a lot of changes could be made. But I won't get ahead of myself. I believe, I'd have to look up the exact wording, but I believe at 5 dimes, the condition was that all teams must play at least 59 games, which would mean that we are boned if the Marlins don't. But I could be wrong about that, and other books might have different conditions.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the questions that are coming in now are more about some real meat as to how you guys work, how you guys factor in different things. And I think this is what's going to be definitely more interesting to a lot of people that are tuning into this broadcast. Adam Zemsik on YouTube asked the following of Andrew: how would you account for the long rest in player-based models that had been performing well? Seems foolish to assume players would revert to the mean in any metric given the long rest. Andrew, you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Adam. I would say, generally speaking, the first thing that comes to mind is I would want to watch a game or two. I would want to make my projections using my model and watch a game or two and see how far off I am, or see if there is some source of variation, like for example, the lag, the rest, that looks like it's pulling, the observations kind of one way or the other. I don't think that the rest is actually as big a deal as you might think. I think that there are other factors that might skew some of the observations, but I don't think that it's necessarily the rest. So for example, in the NBA, one thing that I've noticed watching their little scrimmages is it almost seems like they're afraid to get close to each other to play defense. And it's not something you're going to see in the stats really, but and I have seen it's starting to get a little bit tighter, but there looks like there's some hesitancy to actually get close to play the man-to-man coverage, because understandably nobody wants to, get spat on or sweat on and inadvertently maybe test positive for COVID-19. Totally understandable. But I think that you're seeing maybe some of that apprehension play out in the defense. And so I think that could end up maybe having some impact on these games: looser defense, more open offense, more open looks, and so a higher point per shot if you're looking at the kind of Moneyball NBA concept. But those would be things that I would be looking at maybe more carefully than just the rest and how much rest affects a model, because at the start of a season, when you make a model, the players haven't played all summer, and a model that you make on past data can be very effective early in the season, even though it's a brand new season. So again, I don't think that the rest is going to be as big a deal as maybe some people might think.
Interesting. Yeah. You might have noticed I made a little note there. I'm taking notes tonight. I don't know if anybody else is, but I'm always impressed by these two gentlemen and what they share with people. And so if you see me kind of jotting something down, I'm totally taking notes tonight. So, but that's good information. Okay, here's a question that came through on YouTube. I think this is one that some people will find interesting with what your answers are. Is Bayesian or Frequentist, and why? Matt, we're going to go to you first.
Thank you. Definitely Bayesian. I think that both in my career and in my hobby, there is a lot of value in learning from information as it comes in and in quantifying uncertainty. So it is not good enough to say, hey, the line on this is plus 100 and I give it a 54% probability of winning, because no model is perfect. What if I'm wrong? How wrong could I be off by? Is it more likely to be 52 or 56? What's my confidence interval around that 54? And that actually leads into what a fractional Kelly stake should be. One of my articles I wrote, I think a year or two ago on Pinnacle, called Toward the Theory of Everything, goes into more detail about that if you're interested. But I personally believe that the Bayesian framework is so much better suited for something like sports betting analytics than the Frequentist framework.
Interesting. Andrew?
I completely agree with that. Bayesian is the way to go. Matt is the resident expert on that, clearly, but I have a few things I think I could add. The first is that if you understand what we're trying to do when we're modeling sports, and you understand what differentiates the Bayesian approach and the Frequentist approach, it actually becomes very clear which one is better without having to really make a case for either. One of the distinguishing features is that we are trying to make predictions in a low information environment. Most statisticians would agree that an 82 game season or 160 games, or, you know, that is a small sample in the greater scope of things. Most statisticians would laugh at 10,000 samples as being small, right? And so we're looking at, you know, what might seem like large, but in actuality are very small samples. And there's no way to get frequentist confidence intervals and certainty in sample sizes that small that will allow you to really stand out. If you need to have the best possible answer with the least amount of information, you want the credible interval and you want the Bayesian approach, because it learns the fastest and produces the best answer when you have the least amount of data and the most amount of uncertainty. And I think that would be my pitch for why you should really get into Bayes.
I don't know if you're looking for a fifth career, Andrew, but you would kill it in the actuarial world. That's a great answer.
No, that was a really good answer. I was going to jokingly try to take the frequentist argument out of that, but after listening to the two of you, there's no way I could possibly come up with even something as a joke that would stand up to that. So that's true. And anyone who's kind of interested more about Bayesian theory and statistics, I did reference a couple good books over some of my previous webcasts. The one that I read that's probably the one that I felt like kind of handled it the best, most all-encompassing, was called A Student's Guide to Bayesian Analysis, or Bayesian Statistics. I'm trying to read my bookshelf across the room. But anyway, A Student's Guide to Bayesian something was very good, and it was very all-encompassing. So good. Let's move on to another question here about your process. Can you describe a starting point for analyzing a field of players, i.e. NASCAR, golf, etc., for the purposes of then taking a head-to-head matchup props? So this is something interesting, because I think a lot of people get interested in this when they they see somebody like Rufus, you know, crushing it on golf. They go, oh, well, there's all these head-to-head props. And of course, somebody like me says, you know, don't bet into future pools, bet into head-to-head matchups. First of all, what experience do you guys have with doing this sort of thing, and what experiences would you like to share in terms of your process? Matt's nodding his head, so I'm going to go to Matt first.
Yeah, I can take this. I've actually done a lot of this, not in NASCAR or golf, but in props like which hockey player in a game is going to score the most goals. You know, a player matchup, one player on each team who's going to score the most points, or you know, basketball, who's going to score the most points. I think the way I would approach it is pretty similar between those and definitely golf. I'm not sure about NASCAR, just because I've never done any work in auto racing before. But I think what you'd need to do is build a probability distribution for each player in your matchup. So if we're looking at golf and you're looking at you know, Tiger Woods against Phil Mickelson, what you'd want to do, and there are a million different ways to do this, is come up with, okay, what's a probability Tiger shoots, you know, 5 over, 4 over, 3 over, 2 over, 1 over, even par, -1, -2, all the way down the whole range of reasonable possibilities. Do the same thing for Phil, and then go through all the combinations of what Tiger could shoot, what Phil could shoot. What's the probability of that combination? And it's probably fair to assume they're independent, so it would just be the product of each of the individual probabilities. And then you just add up all the ones where Tiger's score is better than Phil's score, all the ones where Tiger's score is equal to Phil's score, and all the ones where it's worse than Phil's score. And you just add up the probabilities for each of those three outcomes, and that would give you your matchup probability.
Okay. Andrew, you have anything to add there?
No, I like the independent product matrix approach. I'm a fan. That's probably how I would deal with the head-to-head. When it comes to horse racing or NASCAR or things like this, I've been asked this quite a bit actually by some of the readers of my books. And one of the first things that that comes to mind is a form of Monte Carlo simulation. I would be looking at, for example, like let's do NASCAR, right? I would say, okay, if I could get some distributions on how, like let's turn everything into seconds per lap. right? And then let's look at distributions of seconds per lap and get the general sense of how this data behaves. And then we could simulate seconds per lap times number of laps times, some other confounding factor. And we could maybe start to get an estimate of ranges for, the race times for the individual competitors, simulate it thousands of times and get a distribution for who is most likely to win and how often, etc. That would be the only thing I would have to add. I think that you can do something like that and get pretty interesting results for greyhounds, horses, NASCAR, maybe even golf, but I think that golf is more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I agree with that. The times that I've done it, I've taken a similar approach in, finding out the probability distribution of each individual person and then running Monte Carlo simulations against that. And it's worked out fairly well. So
yeah, Monte Carlo simulations, they can be very powerful. They can also be a little bit dangerous because they're only as good or as bad as the assumptions you put into them. And if you build a bad Monte Carlo simulation, it can give you a false sense of certainty where you say, hey, I ran this sim 10,000 times and 9,996 of them Tiger beat Phil. So it's a lock. And people say, well, I ran 1 trillion simulations, so my model can't be wrong. And they key on the number of simulations. But what's way more important than the number of simulations is how you build that model, what assumptions are going into it, what distributional methods are you using. So Monte Carlo simulation is it's kind of like uranium. It can be really powerful in the right hands and it can be really dangerous in the wrong hands.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point because like you said, a lot of people think that more simulations equals more certainty, and it's only more certainty in the small world of the model. It's the model, comma, given what it knows, comma, is confident of this. And so it's those different sources of uncertainty that feature in some of Matt's fantastic articles on Pinnacle. And so you have to, just because it's 99% certain about what it knows, there are assumptions and things that it's purposely blocking out that also you have to take into account and, downgrade your certainty.
Okay, good. That was good discussion. Sean Dickert over on Zoom asks, do you see parimutuel pools being offered on U.S. sports at any point in the next 5 years, 10 years? If so, what are your thoughts on wagering into a pool versus with a book? It's an interesting question, Sean. Here's the problem with parimutuel pools. I'll take this first real quick. Is the takeout is usually obnoxious. And that's the problem is you need to, in order to have a product that can compete with a sports book, you need to have that takeout to be a number that's competitive with a sports book, maybe even less than a sports book. But when the example being horse racing, the track takeout just continues to grow higher and higher over the years. Now they have tried parimutuel sports betting in Nevada. Vic Salerno had a company that was trying it, and then they were trying to do it with DFS. So in other words, it was basically DFS betting. You could bet on how many touchdowns Tom Brady would throw in a game, and the end result was parimutually based. But it didn't really take off. Wasn't really appealing to people. And I think one of the reasons it wasn't is because it just wasn't really competitive with the sports book product. If we continue to see books that limit for prop bets, I could see some kind of parimutuel prop betting product kind of take off in the US. I think it would work well. So will we see it in 5 to 10 years? I don't know. I think somebody will try it at some point. I think somebody's going to try just about everything. But with the US market right now, it's all state-based. So depends on what state they open up in, depends on how much marketing muscle they have. It's not really a level playing field when it comes to your sports betting market these days. So I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts to add on that one?
Yeah, I can. Unless Andrew, do you want to go first?
I don't have a ton to add on that one. I was actually just reading this next question.
Okay. I can take it. It's an interesting question, and there are a lot of pros and cons to parimutuel pools. I mean, your point, Jack, is exactly right. That in horse racing, the track takeouts are just enormous. Does it necessarily have to be that way? I don't think so. I think that the reason it's so big in horse racing has more to do with horse racing itself being a very expensive way to create gambling outcomes compared to a blackjack table or a slot machine. And so that might be the reason why the vig or the takeout is so high in horse racing. And I think if you're a bookmaker, you would have much less risk. You'd have no risk offering a parimutuel pool versus you do have risk offering traditional odds. So economically speaking, you could make the case that you could run a parimutuel pool with a lower takeout or a lower vig than what's currently being charged in traditional. I still think it's not going to have legs for sports, and the simple reason is that if you are a recreational bettor and you place a bet, you want to know what your odds are at the time you place the bet. You don't want to place a bet at plus 130, and then by the time the game starts, you're now at minus 200. Which is, this isn't what I signed up for. If I had known it was minus 200, I wouldn't have placed it at the time. And I think that could be really annoying to your more casual bettors. I think it's tolerated in North American horse racing today because North American horse racing players don't have a choice.
Right.
But it would be interesting to hear from some of our UK friends, where I believe both systems exist there, and they would have some more insight into the differences and how successful each of them are. So if you talk about UK horse racing on your next happy hour, Jack, I would definitely tune in for that discussion.
We'll see. Okay, Andrew, you want to move on to the next one, or are you?
Yeah. I didn't have. I thought that was a pretty nice summation by both of you gentlemen. But yeah, I noticed some of these other questions coming in are quite interesting. I think people would get a lot out of both of them, actually.
Let's go for it then. Brian Hester asks, this is the one you were talking about, correct, Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian Hester asks, do you think there's value in middling NBA totals if there's closing line value? Example, I got Jazz Pelicans over at 220.5, and now I think it's at 224 224, there's 224.5 out there too. How could you evaluate if middling is smart, also based on different range of totals? In other words, 3.5 middle seems to me to be much more important on a 220 total as opposed to a 250 total. Take it, Andrew.
Well, and Brian, you're absolutely right. Obviously, the game context of the total matters. That's very, very sensical thinking, and I applaud you for that. What you want to do here is actually referenced in True Poker Joe's book, Sharper, right? You want to create a push frequency chart for NBA totals. But what you want to do is you want it to be book specific, and you also want it to be total specific. So when the bookmaker makes the line 220, how often does it hit exactly 220, exactly 219, exactly 218, etc.? And you want so the value of every number contextualized by the bookmaker's total line number. If you have that, which obviously takes some work, and it's a little bit outside the scope of what we're going to talk about here. But once you have that, it becomes a very simple math question, because now you can say, what's the value of the numbers in my middle? What's the edge on that? And is that edge larger or smaller than the expected edge I have just from the CLV of my original bet? And that really is the short and sweet of how you figured this out.
Yeah, really, really good point there at the end that I think a lot of people pass over when they're trying to look at middles is you need to compare it to if you have more edge in just keeping your original bet versus the edge you get in that middle. In your example there, Brian, 220.5, and let's just use 224.5 if you're able to get the best line out there. So you have a middle attempt landing on the 221, 222, 223, and 224. Now, just random number ways, let's say they're each worth 2%. Well, that's 8% probability of landing in that middle. And we know that if you play both sides at minus 110, you're dealing with about a 4.5% VIG. So you know you have a positive EV wager if you wanted to go for that middle, assuming these numbers are correct. I'm not saying they are or they aren't. Point being, though, is if you were to just play that 220.5 over, you have, and the line ends at 224.5, you have that 8% edge right there with your original bet without having to do any kind of middle work at all. So you just have more variance this way. Matt, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think the answer to this really depends on one key thing, and that's, do you believe the current line of 224 is an efficient number, is the sort of theoretically correct number? If you do, then your decision to hedge should be solely based on your risk tolerance. You know, do you want to have not a guaranteed profit, but a limited loss, which with a 8 to 10% probability of hitting that middle, or do you want to let that original bet ride? And you know, there are a lot of articles by myself and others at Pinnacle about, you know, when do you want to hedge, when do you not want to hedge. We can get into the Kelly criterion and all that, but I would say in general, unless you have insane life-changing amounts of money on the line, if you think that the 224 is efficient, then by necessity, taking that under 224 is a minus EV bet, and you normally don't want to take minus EV bets just for the purpose of hedging. Now, if you believe the market has overreacted and the right number is, you know, 222, 223, then I'd be more inclined to fire away. You know, even if you're, let's say, break even, because the value of the 1.5, let's say, of edge you have is about enough to overcome the VIG. Well, now you're making a zero EV bet, and you're getting that benefit of risk mitigation, risk reduction through hedging, and that the calculus of it will be quite a bit different. But I would generally not advise taking minus EV hedge bets unless it's something like, you know, you've got a 500 to 1 future and you're contingent on the last game, and you can hedge a bit of it out, and it's, you know, you're looking at $1 million score. Those kinds of things, sure, but in the general course of things, it will just cost you money in the long run.
Good point there. I'm going to jump over here to YouTube for a question or two. Andrew, do you have any plans for another book? Somebody also suggested maybe write one about basic models in R and Python. So talk about that.
Yeah, you know, appreciate the question. Appreciate people checking out the books, of course. Yeah, I do have some ideas along those lines. There are a couple of things that I'm sort of rattling around in my head right now. The first one is some walkthrough videos for the first 2 books, just to sort of take you into my world, and I'll, you know, watch me build them from scratch and talk about how I think about it and stuff like that. And some people have expressed some interest in that, and so I've been sort of considering how I might put that together. And the other thing is exactly what was suggested of a statistical sports models in R, something like that, where we don't really cover anything new per se in terms of the models. I think the first 2 books, I think, give people a tremendous amount to work with, certainly more than I ever had when I started. But the idea would be to take those models and to show you how you can operate them and construct them in R. And so how can we build those models in R and get you onto a more sophisticated coding platform, basically. And so, yeah, I've definitely thought about that. It's definitely something that I've been sort of working on a little bit, but it'll be a little while before anything like that comes to fruition. I do appreciate the interest, though.
Cool. Matt, do you have any plans for a book or anything?
Maybe it's on my bucket list to write a book, and maybe not as much now that a lot of my best content has been given out in my blog. But I think maybe one day when I don't have the full-time job and the 2 young kids at home, and I have some more free time on my hands, you know, I'd love to read a book. I don't know if anybody would read it, but I would love to write one. Wouldn't be about R or Python, though. I don't do R or Python. This is my chance to be old. I don't do R or Python. I can't even spell R. I'm an Excel guy through and through. Part of it is I'm just lazy. I never took the time to learn R or Python. Part of it is I tend to specialize in things like prop bets, where you wouldn't have 100 million rows of data, and Excel is plenty good enough. And part of it is I just like to be able to visualize all the different steps in a complicated formula. And if there's an error in my formula, I can see how it goes from column A to column B to column C, and I can spot sort of what's happening more than I could by using a block of code. And I know I get I take a lot of flack from the community. I don't know if my friend Necessary Paper is on here watching this. He likes to razz me about my preference for Excel over R, but it's just not something that I've ever had the time or maybe even the ability to get into.
I actually think that's a great answer, because that's a huge benefit to Excel that people like to shit all over. And it's just, the truth is that in R or Python, you can make a mistake, like a fatal mistake for your model, but the code will still run. Now what do you do, right? If you're not keenly aware of every step and what is supposed to happen, it's going to be spitting out all kinds of, faulty outputs on you, and that's no good at all. So Excel, absolutely. One of the huge benefits is that you can see, as I said, I think on a previous podcast, you can pop the hood, you can check out the engine, see how everything works. And if it's not working, you can find the problems and identify the problems before you go and you bet money on something. And yeah, is it as sophisticated? Does it have all of the functionality? No. Can you do an awful lot with Excel if you really put your mind to it? Absolutely, you can.
The pivot table especially is an underappreciated object in Excel. And I encourage everyone who doesn't have the time to learn R to learn pivot tables in Excel, because it's very easy to use and extremely powerful.
Okay, good. Okay, we have our first audio caller, Cowboy Kid. I am enabling your audio, and you should be able to join us. Cowboy Kid, welcome, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
All right, thanks for having me on, Jack. I appreciate it. So my question is more for Andrew and PlusEV. I mean, Captain Jack, all respect to you, but these two guys are probably the most analytical minds in the game. So what happens when you bet on something based on your model and the market disagrees? Do you guys ever double down on your bet when you get a better line, or do you sometimes try to get off of it?
Andrew, you want to take that one first?
Sure. That's a really good question, right? What do you do when you've spent a bunch of time working on your model, you think it's pretty good, you fire on a bet, and the market tells you to put a point on it? No. Right? It's not a good sign. It's not really what you want to see. Now, there's a couple of ways to look at that. I think that if you look at Matt's article, Towards a Theory of Everything, right? If you have model inputs or a conceptualization of the game that is so new that no one else has thought of it, then you can make buckets of money, but your closing line value would be zero. And that's something that's quite counterintuitive to people. But it is possible, although let's be honest, it's unlikely, because again, you would be creating something that the world had never seen before. So it's possible that you could be in a situation where the market could say no, move against you, but you might still actually, in the greater scheme, be right from what I just said. It's more likely, though, that that's not the case. And then the question becomes, what do you do? Well, certainly you don't double down on something where the market is disagreeing with you, and it's unlikely that you have something so novel that no one else has any idea of its impact on the game. So then the question becomes, well, do you hedge it, right? Do you try to hedge off this game? Maybe. Sometimes there have been a couple of games where I have tried to hedge myself off the game if the market really moves against me in a vicious way. But generally, I'm pretty happy with taking the risk because I've done the modeling work, and I think if you do the appropriate amount of testing, most of the time you're better off once you're actually actively betting to just ride it out. And I would actually say something similar with regards to cashing out like bets too. Like, you shouldn't be doing that stuff. You should be trusting your model by doing the amount of hard work that's necessary, and then you should be rolling with it once you're convinced that you've got something.
Yeah, the one thing I would rarely or never do is buy out of the position, because in a case like this, either the market's right or I'm right. If the market is right, then buying out of the position is just betting into an efficient number. And just like we just talked about in the hedge conversation, there's really no reason to do that. If I'm right, I'm betting into a bad number if I hedge out of it. Would I double down? Unlikely. Depends on what kind of market we're talking about. Maybe if it was a really, really illiquid market and I was super, super confident that I have an angle that nobody else has. When I bet that triples prop at 5 dimes, I think I bet it from -130 up to -210, and it got brought back down, I think, to -170. But I think that just because the 5 dimes had moved it and other books had not, so there was just arbitrage going on out there. But I think generally in that situation, I would stand pat. If I'm wrong, the damage is already done. Nothing really you can do about it now. And if I'm right, I'll take my profits.
Good.
Thanks,
Good.
guys. I appreciate that.
Now, Cowboy Kid, you had a second question here, the one you had asked on Twitter last night, and I think you wanted to see if you get Andrew Mack's opinion on that. Do you want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, Andrew, I wanted to get your opinion on kind of the game theory with this new rule in the MLB with a man starting on second. But I kind of is a question for the new rule and the old rule, like just normal baseball. When it goes to like extra, like who has the informational advantage, the home team or the away team? Would you put? And then I'll further my stance. I think that the away team would have it because when they pitch second, they have information to let them know that they can walk. If there's a guy on second, or say a guy leads off with a triple, they can walk the bases loaded to put a guy on second, guy on first. And now you have a force out at home. You have double play balls if you get a strikeout. There's just I thought that the away team would have the informational advantage. So Andrew, I would like you to answer first, if you don't mind, because the other two answered me on Twitter. So I'm really interested in your answer, Andrew.
Well, thanks. Honestly, I got on it late. I had a few things to do, and then I think I checked in and saw that you already had some great answers. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't think that I had a tremendous amount to add to what you received on Twitter. I thought you had a nice spread there of reasonable opinions. Just trying to think about it now. Sort of put me on the spot here. It's one of those things that I haven't thought about a lot because if I'm being perfectly honest with you, my MLB model blew up last year. And that's the straight truth. I had 2 fantastic years with full game MLB where I did 42 or so units, and then I did 48 units. And then last year I was -12. So my MLB model took a huge hit. I think that it was not incorporating the StatCast, the pitch FX data enough into the model. And so that caused me to basically pitch the whole thing, stick to props. I made back all of the loss in the season using props, but I'm in the middle of actually retooling my MLB model, and I haven't thought too much about the various game states as a result of that. So I'm sorry that I can't be of more help to you at the moment.
It's a really timely question because I'm watching my Blue Jays on MLB Gamecasts, and they are 0-0 at the top of the 10th right now. So we might get a sample size of one answer right here. But I think at least as far as the old extra inning rules goes, this shouldn't be a question we should have to guess at. There's got to be somebody out there with a data set of, how often does the home team win in extra innings, controlling for the regular home field advantage that's built into the game line. So if anybody out there has that, I'd be interested in finding the answer. I haven't done it myself personally. I think yeah, go ahead, Gareth.
This isn't the first time this rule's been implemented. It's Mexican leagues have been using it for a while. AAA, one of the AAA leagues in the International League used it last year. So it has been tested out. I think there's definitely some game theory here that some managers get and some managers don't. And this, baseball has always been one of these sports where managers do play into your expectation in the game. Football more so than other sports, baseball below that, then below that basketball, below that hockey in terms of like manager skill. And so this is an area where it kind of increases the manager skill factor into baseball. So I don't have all the answers, but it was an interesting question that Cowboy Kid raised, definitely.
I swear I was about to make the point that the walking of the batter is an overrated strategy, because if you walk the next guy, you load the bases and you're in big trouble. And while I was getting ready to make that point in the top of the 10th in the Washington game, they walked the first guy unintentionally and then walked the next guy. Now the bases are loaded with nobody out.
I see
Proves
that.
my point, right?
I actually have over 2.5 in that game that I grabbed in game.
You might get there.
So we might get there. Who knows? Okay. Meanwhile, here's some other questions that have come in. And by the way, if you're just joining us midway through here, we're probably going to go about another 30 minutes. So if you have questions to submit, we have some in the queue here, but we'll probably have time to get to one or two more beyond this within the next half hour. So here's a question in the Zoom Q&A from Jonathan. And he asked, if you could force the wider market makers to create one new player prop market for one of the 4 major sports, what would you like to see that isn't part of the current homogenous offering? I'll tell you, once I read that, I've been thinking about it. I can't really come up with anything off the top of my head. So I'm just gonna stall here so these guys can think a little bit more. I will say that the first time I saw PointsBet and their points betting option where you could bet props and then how right you are, was a multiple of your payout, I thought that was like the greatest thing I'd ever seen. In fact, the very first prop I played there, I played a number of seconds it would take for a 3-pointer to be made in each NBA game. And I created a quick model. I went back, I went through all the play-by-play and kind of came up with different teams seemed to take longer to attempt their first 3-pointer in the game. And so I thought I had an edge here. And I just got walloped betting it the first month or so. I got walloped so bad that the CEO of PointsBet used my example. And in interviews he would give, he'd say, we have a professional bettor that plays into us on the number of seconds that'll take for a 3-pointer to be made, and he's loving it. Well, no, I wasn't loving it. I was like, how am I losing? But anyway, I'm kind of just stalling here. Do you guys have any ideas on a player prop market that you haven't seen before that you'd like to see?
Well, I love the PointsBet concept, and I've dabbled in it as well. I'm down as well. But I think that the challenge for the bookmaker, when you're offering a regular over-under, all you have to get right is the median of the distribution. But if you're offering a PointsBet, you pretty much have to get the whole thing right. Otherwise, you can get yourself into some trouble. So I think there are some opportunities there. For specific prop bets, I think the player goals and assists matchup that it's actually one that used to be offered here in Ontario through the Ontario lottery kind of parlay betting system that they had here. And there were some really cool correlated parlays that were available back in the day and are long gone by now. And that was one of them where you could actually bet, the Leafs to beat the Canadians and, Matt Sundin to have more goals plus assists than Saku Koivu. And so I put a lot of effort and time into modeling that. So I would love to dust that one off and be able to use it again.
Andrew?
Yeah, I like the PointsBet concept too. It reminds me of options trading. Actually, it's like a call or a put, right? Because you have unlimited upside if it turns out that you're closer to the true value than the book line, and so it gives you some considerable leverage if you turn out that you're right. And if you're wrong, well, you've got inverted leverage. It's difficult to think of a market that I would like to see that doesn't exist yet. But if I'm going to throw one out just to keep things colorful, let's do minutes played for players. How about an over/under line for minutes played, right? That would be quite interesting. It's something that I already do anyways, in order to work out a number of various player props, and I think that would be kind of interesting, and it would be a nice way for me to leverage some of the work that I already do.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that, but I agree. I think we all do it that way, and it'd be nice to be able to leverage that work. Okay, question over here on YouTube chat. Tiffany asks, how can you build a prop model with no historical odds to backtest against? Andrew, I believe there was a chapter in statistical sports models in Excel in version number 1, volume number 1, about this very thing, right? Bootstrapping?
Yep.
Where was that?
You could definitely do the bootstrap. Historical odds obviously are important, but Tiffany's bringing up a very important point, which is that it's fucking hard sometimes, pardon my French, to find odds for these various prop bets, especially enough that you can get, a big, 30,000 foot view of, is this working? Is this not working? Very true. Now, one person's problem is another person's opportunity, because I will say this to you and to Tiffany, right? The fact that this is difficult to find also means that there's opportunity here for people that are willing to do the work, and for people that aren't dissuaded by the fact that it's kind of a pain in the butt. So there's always that double-edged sword of if it's difficult, it's actually a barrier to entry that actually presents itself with an opportunity for you if you're willing to do the work. To actually answer the question, I would say that there's other ways to give yourself an indicator of whether or not something is likely to work. So I think in my books, we talked about mean absolute error. We've talked about log loss for probabilistic forecasts. We've talked about root mean squared error. But really, you could take a look at, what your model is kicking out for mean absolute error, what the mean absolute error is for smaller samples that you might be able to collect on your own, and you could get a sense very quickly of, am I way off here, or am I actually pretty close and this warrants further investigation? Beyond that, we're going to be talking about scraping and database creation, and I'm not going to talk too much about that. So,
okay, good. Go ahead, Matt.
So I think that one, I can give maybe a different, less mathematical answer. I think when it comes to prop bets where you don't have a lot of historical data on the odds and you're trying to figure out, can my number beat the market? It really helps to have a narrative of why the number might be the way it is and why my number might be better. So if there's a prop on, James Harden over under 34.5 points and my number is 38, is there a reason why the odds maker would have pegged it at 34.5 and I would have pegged it at 38? For example, is 34.5 just his straight average on the year? And I know he shoots a lot of threes. He's playing against a team with poor three-point defense, and that's why I bumped him up off his average. I think if you can put together a reason why the number is the way it is and why it's wrong, there is a much greater likelihood that any difference between your number and the market number will be because you're right instead of because the market is right and you're wrong.
That's actually a fantastic point. And
yeah.
I completely agree with Matt. I do something like that all the time, and absolutely people should be doing that. And there's a couple things that I'll add just to sort of give a little more detail to our overall podcast here, because I think that's what people want, right? They don't just want to hear the blah, 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 blah. They want to hear stuff that they can use to actually help them up their game a little bit. So when you're looking at those numbers, thinking why they are the way they are, if you look at statistical sports models in Excel Volume 2, you'll see that a lot of the time I break it down by player minutes and then efficiency performance. One thing that I didn't mention in the book that I think is a pretty good tip is that the efficiency metric, if you look at it as a 2-variable problem, is usually very well done. The one that's usually not very well done is the expected minutes. So if you're, generally speaking, if you want to be, upping your game on props and trying to find a good reason for why your number might be better than the book's number, as Matt alluded to, you should be looking in the minutes department, not in the player efficiency department, because it's the minutes that are going to be subject to more game by game variance than the actual efficiency metric. Generally speaking, of course, the efficiency still is subject to change on defensive schemes and one-on-one matchups and things like that. But the minutes by far are where you should be spending the majority of your time. Most people don't spend nearly enough time working on minutes. The other thing I was going to add to that was, like Matt said, right? Why might your number be better, right? If you want to get really good at NBA props, the other one little suggestion I would make is start only looking at centers. Pick on centers. And the reason I say pick on centers is because centers are the most predictable position in basketball. They are subject to the least amount of variation in terms of their matchups, the least amount of variation in terms of their floor positioning. And as a result, they are the most, I was almost going to say predictable, but I don't want to quite say that. They lend themselves most easily to statistical analysis. Let's say that. That's a little more nuanced. If you look at centers, you're going to find that you have an easier time understanding some of the things that Matt was talking about. And so I'll throw that into the mix as well. And I hope that it helps.
Okay, good. Matt jumped off there for a second, but he's back already. So that's good.
I lost you for a second. It's our Canadian Wi-Fi. The beavers on the wheel generating all the electricity. They must have taken a nap or something.
All right, good. Andrew, that was some excellent stuff right there. That was maybe too good, but that's all right. I'll let it pass. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes to go here. We're going to go through some of these other questions. Hey, let's have a drink here. Cowboy Kid, like my Flyers koozie. Thank you, sir.
Someone thought that we weren't all drinking, so I just thought I'd show them how we're doing here.
I could pick up Cowboy Kid's Delco accent pretty easily there. I don't know if I'm correct there on the county that he's in, but it sounded pretty Delco to me. Okay. Brian Hester had asked, and we kind of answered this already, but for someone learning to code for sports only, Excel, R, or Python, the best for someone who does not have much of a coding background. I think we kind of covered this. These guys are pretty pro Excel. I will say, I'll add this in here. I used to be very much an Excel person, but the first time I started to use Python, I was like, wow, this is so much faster. And then the first time I used R, I was like, wow, I can't believe I used to, have to wait around, because I used to do like logistic regression in Excel, which is not an easy thing to do. And if you have a couple of those that you're trying to do, or you're trying to like narrow it down, you could be wasting hours in setting up the spreadsheets and setting up the logistic regressions. Whereas in R, it's just pretty much like just retype the code and it runs. So, but I do think for anyone who doesn't have a coding background, Excel is the easiest solution. Although the one I did in one of my videos, Orange, if you haven't checked out Orange yet, it's a very interesting and powerful product. You won't get a lot of tutorials that relate to sports betting, but it is very strong in terms of doing all the advanced stuff, but still having a graphical interface so that you don't feel like you need to learn syntax. Let's go to another question here from Sean. He says, how rigorously will you test a hypothesis or model prior to betting it? Similarly, how long will you continue to bet through a model that's facing a significant drawdown? Either of you want to take that first?
So I can give you the theoretical answer, and that's covered in my Theory of Everything article. And it gives you a really kind of Bayesian approach where, okay, you think your model is right with a certain probability, and then you update that probability as results come in. And obviously, if the results are poor, there's a certain threshold where you lose so much confidence in your model that it's time to quit. I can't say I've ever actually used that in real life. It's more of an academic concept. But there really is no magic number. I think if you start to question whether your edge is real, and you go back and look at your modeling approach, and you say, wait a minute, these assumptions I made, these methods that I chose, now that I've got 100 games of results and I'm down 10 units, how sure am I about these choices I've made? And if you're still, rock solid, keep at it. But if you're, well, you know what, I might have been wrong here, and taking a second look at it, I think you really have to be introspective. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to know when it's time to move on to something else. Sorry for the non-answer.
I actually thought that was a great answer. Matt's article on Towards a Theory of Everything actually has a very, very articulate and succinct way to tell you whether you're about to go down with the ship or not. And I think that if people are interested in, hey, how do I know if this edge is real or whatever, you should read that, and you should try to apply it on your own. And obviously, if you run into too many difficulties, you can always hit up PlusEV on the Twitter, but you can also simulate, and there are a number of articles on Pinnacle for this as well, just FYI, but you can also simulate the chance that, a model with a 5% edge would be down X percent over 500 bets or 1,000 bets, to give yourself some grounding in the possibility that even if you have a positive expectancy, you could end the season with a loss, or multiple seasons with a loss, and that there is a non-zero probability of that happening. And that's true whether you're trading options or betting sports or investing in index funds. I mean, it's real. It's the nature of risk, right? So yeah, like Matt said, there's no magic number where it's like, oh, I've hit 500 bets. This thing is time for the recycle bin. Like it's not that cut and dry. There is a little bit of judgment involved, and but I would say that definitely you don't want to give up before you are at least in hundreds of bets, provided you've done the necessary back testing and the work. That's always sort of a caveat. But if you have, it has to be in the hundreds of bets, because most models, if they're going to really fail, they fail in the thousands of bets. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think one of the key things to understand if you're a sports bettor, and one thing that a lot of people don't understand, is variance. You need to have a healthy understanding of how variance really affects your work. And, Andrew made the point. You need to know what the probability is of you being down after this many bets. You need to know how long it takes to get into the long run, which is probably longer than you have. So I think that's key. And that kind of dovetails into the next question here is, as statistics-based bettors, do you put any value on the eye test for your bets? I'll go in a little bit of detail here with this one is, do you take qualitative angles with your quantitative analysis? I admit that, yes, I have done that in the past. Mainly, I use the qualitative analysis, like just the eye test, to see something that I don't think is right, and then I back it up with the numbers through the quantitative analysis. I don't know if you guys have similar approach, or if there's no qualitative analysis whatsoever in your reasoning.
I think I believe in the validity of it. I tend not to use it just because I don't think that my eye is good enough to beat the market, but I accept that others' eyes could be. I use eye test more in model validation. I've had people say, hey, Matt, look at my model. it's got the market is Buffalo -3, and I've got Buffalo -15. This is a great bet. And I said, well, wait a minute, like you got a 12-point difference in the market, so either you're way off or the market is way off. From a Bayesian point of view, which is more likely? So I know that wasn't the question, but that would be how I use the eye test.
I do use the eye test from time to time, but with a few nuances. One, only on bets with the least number of moving parts, which usually means a prop bet. So the more things that can go wrong, the more things that it's unlikely for you to be able to determine kind of with the eye test, the less likely it's valid. And so I think that if you're talking about like, I look at a point spread for the NFL on Sunday morning, and I just look at it and I know it's wrong. No, I might look at a number and sort of raise an eyebrow and think that seems a little off. But the next thing that I will do immediately after that is I will go to the model and I will look at the numbers and I will say, why do I think that, and see is there a rational basis for that, or am I just gut shotting it? But with prop bets, I think that there is some validity in the kind of eye test. And I can give you an example. And I don't know if this is so much an example of the eye test as it is sort of more qualitative analysis. But there was one prop bet where 2 years ago on Kyrie Irving's number of assists. And he basically had a game or two where he had 1 or 2 assists, like his assists were really, really low, and his coach chewed him out publicly, like it was in the newspaper, where he was like, this dirty so-and-so is being a selfish, blah, 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 and needs to pass the goddamn ball, and so they just ripped him apart about passing the ball. And the next game came up and his assists were low, right? They were very low. And I just thought, there's no way. This guy has got to try to pass more this game, and somebody's going to hit those shots and he's going to get the assist registered. And so that was one bet that I do remember making where it was pure eyeball test, where I just thought, qualitatively, this is going over for sure. And it did. So there you go.
Okay. All right. So we have time for one more question here, and it's an interesting question to ask of two Canadians. But Brian asks, is there a basic process for political betting that anyone can share? What data is taken into account? I will recuse myself. I've never made a political bet, so I don't know.
I've made a few. I can start unless you want to, Andrew.
I've got something to say, but I don't know if it's going to be as detailed as maybe what you do. So,
boy, we have an Albertan and an American and me here, so I got to be careful what I say. So the couple of, I don't know if you want to call them angles that I look at when I'm making political bet. Obviously, you can't do much in terms of data-driven analysis. You can look at Nate Silver and the polls and all that stuff, but it's a question of how much do you trust that versus the market. I don't think there's any really easy way to answer that. The one thing I look at is going back to Taleb and his idea of anti-fragility. Expose yourself to positive surprises. So the one thing I am on is a bet that was a few months ago on 5 dimes, and it was Trump versus the field, and I have the field. So not only do I win if Biden beats Trump, but I win if Pence wins the election, if Trump dies or quits, or it's not outside the realm of possibility that he could fake a medical condition and go out with whatever dignity he has left, and exit the race that way, and where straight matchup bets would just get voided. I would actually win in that case because I've got the field versus Trump. So you open yourself to surprises that could potentially help you in your bet. And the other thing I would look at is to think of reasons why the market might get it wrong. And I think Biden on Pinnacle now is about -185 versus Trump's like plus 155 or something. And I think if you were to rewind the clock 4 years and have the polls show what they are showing today, I think you would have Biden as a much higher favorite than Trump, with the information that is out there today about what the polls are showing and the state of the economy and handling of COVID and all these things. And what I think might be happening is the markets might be a little bit gun shy, given what happened 4 years ago, where Trump kind of surprised everyone. And they're saying, well, he sort of defied the odds 4 years ago. It's more likely he'll do it again. And there might be some validity to that. But my sort of unsupported by data opinion is that I think the market is a little bit too short on Biden, given the way the polls are today. So if I didn't already have exposure on not Trump, I'd be tempted to pull a trigger on that minus 180 or minus 185 on Biden.
That's really interesting.
Andrew, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, sorry, I was just distracted. Someone just said plus 300. Andrew can't crush another Coors before this meeting ends. It's like that's a losing
what's
bet.
What's the health limit there?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't do any political betting, but I do have some thoughts on this. First of all, really interesting stuff from Matt. There's an interesting guy on Twitter named Robert Barnes. And he's a lawyer, I think, originally from Nashville, but he bets big money on U.S. political elections, presidential elections, I should say. And I guess, I mean, according to him, right, in a recent study of one, he's doing pretty well at it. One of the things that he talks about a lot is the idea that when they do polls, the people that are supporting someone that is considered for any number of reasons to be unpopular, unsavory, not sort of politically correct to support a certain candidate, that those people are underreported grossly by the polls because they don't self-identify as taking polls, and they don't give out their opinions when people call their houses. And so whatever the true split between party A and party B is, if party A is considered a bunch of dirty so-and-sos by mass media and this and that they're going to be vastly underrepresented in terms of their true numbers when you see polls. And most of the way that we go about predicting these things is with poll numbers and the time series of the growth or decay of popularity. So it's difficult to put anything together with any certainty. I would, and I'm actually inclined to take the other side of Matt's bet and say that I think that the market might be underestimating Trump for that reason. And I don't have any horse in this race, obviously, but I just think that the rationale that people that are supporting that candidate are grossly underrepresented in the polls and thus are being undervalued by various models, I think is a legitimate thought process. But other than that, I wouldn't know too much about how to.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andrew. There's all kinds of sampling bias that can take place. Especially you have different polling methods by different entities. So I think both those things are true, that there is some polling bias and that the market may be overreacting to what happened 4 years ago. It's only a matter of magnitude, which one outweighs the other. And your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, I mean, just gut shotting it there, but that was the only kind of useful thing I could think to add. But both of those points I think are quite salient. And if people are going to be interested in getting into presidential election betting, those are things that you'd want to keep in mind, that kind of stuff for sure. Like Matt said, what not just the surface of what I just said, but the concept of why might the market be wrong. And that's one or two possible answers.
Very good. Very good. Okay, guys, I think we've run out of time for tonight. I do want to mention Andrew's got these two books. They're excellent. If you have not read them, you should. They'll go a long way in furthering your sports betting modeling career. They're available. There's a link in the description below here to link them to Amazon. Matt has a blog that is excellent. He's teaching you the process of betting. He's giving you picks sometimes. And so it's an excellent blog to keep up with. You should also check out that article, The Theory of Everything. I'm going to link that into the description as well, because we've mentioned that a couple times tonight. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel. That it helps me kind of keep this all going and encourages me that people are enjoying what we're trying to accomplish here. So I appreciate that. That's going to do it for this webcast. I will be back with a pre-recorded video next week. In the meantime, I'm going to have some 3-minute reviews of sports books that are going to come out, probably PointsBet and either BetMGM or William Hill. I haven't decided which one of those I want to do, but I'm going to have those up in a few days. So thank you to my guests. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate you guys taking the time here tonight. Cheers, everyone, and good night.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Jack.